Hemshech Hayim Beis, Volume 1. We are on the bottom of page 348. Samach. So we're talking about Simcha, but we're also talking about some painful matters here. So the theme of this chapter is continuing discussion of Zmiris Ha'ilichukecha. David HaMelech was punished, was reprimanded for calling Chukecha Zmiris, calling God's laws songs. We explained Zmiris, number one, was for him a simcha because it was a way to alleviate his suffering. It was to recognize that it was all insignificant compared to one point in Torah, the whole world. And Lazamer, Reloshan Zamer Aritzim, uprooting the weeds, as he spoke, that's getting rid of the klippos in two ways. Getting rid of them from above, Pidya L'mayla, Shrashav Momata, the roots from below and from above, which is eliminating the makif, their source of energy, their supply line from above and their supply line from below. And this chapter is continuing that theme of the sword with the double-edged sword, that also, just like Atali Neshamas Yisrael, the cutting off of the supply lines, sadly, also the feeding of the supply lines is also dependent on Neshamas Yisrael. And two ways. Because our actions affect above, like you said before, Chevel Nachlase, like a rope. So when we behave in a way of, when the human beings, Shamas, behave with Gaius, Snasus, arrogance, that opens up that the klippos also raise their heads and they also become arrogant. Basically, we're feeding that attitude. That's the mindset. Okay, everyone's coming to feed, all of one free for all, as we said. And the second is the opposite, is through giving in, succumbing to the ra chelik harasha begufe, which is avazoras taivas ras, foreign desires and negative or evil lusts. This causes also Lamaila Zibuy Tzimtzum. Here comes the question, that's what it said, Vayishach Adam, Vayishpalish. Vayishach Adam Lamata, when the Adam Lamata bows, no, it succumbs to something that is inferior, Vayishpalish Lamaila, causes the Kavyochel that there should also be a shiflus of Eir Eliki, should be increasingly concealed. So in other words, we can add to Golus. By behaving in a Golasdik way, we add to the Golus. We add to the concealment. Vagam, the question on the table is, and I'm just summing it up, where we're up to, that Apiseides Talshas, even without human behavior, even we don't come onto the scene, meaning we humans, and don't do anything, according to the Kav Amida, there's also a unique. Because remember, as the energy of the world devolves into existence, as our existence, there's a natural diminishment that allows Elam Asiyah to exist, and this world has klippos and sitra achra, independent of human beings. Just take an example, the Nachash HaKadmeni. The Nachash itself was not created by humans, it was sent by God. How does the Nachash have this power to influence people? Because there's a diminishment, so there's a flow to klippos and sitra achra even without us doing anything. So he gives two answers. Not as one and two, but he says, Levad Zeis, in addition to the fact that we add more energy when we also succumb. So in other words, yes, there is a minimal amount that will go into, like he said, Ata Machayas Kulam. Everything gets life from above, even Klippos and Sitra Achra. Which needs explanation, by the way. What means Klippos and Sitra Achra outside of human behavior? I'll go back to that in a moment. It's from Tanya, but let's first say the answer. So one is Teisvus Yinika, that was the first answer. And he gave the explanation based on the Eitz Chaim. The Eitz Chaim says, what is the difference between the diminishment that resulted from Miyot HaYareach, Kitrug HaYareach, the complaint of the moon and the diminishment of the moon, and the diminishment that happened through Chet Eitzadas, which I explained in detail the evolution. So he said, from Kitrug HaLavon and Nistalkot Tesvirus. And Malchus remained alone. Malchus became vulnerable, so to speak. Just Sharshe, just a point, think of it like just a point, everything is extinct. The only thing that remains is one spark of life. But that's the Miut HaLavon, like a Golus. But Chet, they cause that actually the Tesfir should feed Klippos. So we see from this that our actions do more than just what's there without our actions. That's what he says. The second thing he says Specifically, there's something far worse. And that is when we succumb to our base personalities, to our lowest so-called common denominator, to our, we called it?
Base instincts.
Base instincts, or I mentioned a few words.
Lust.
No, I mentioned yesterday, degrade. No, we said a few words. Denigrating or other type of behavior. What happens is we cause the tzimtzum, which was there in order to create the world and give it existence, and still by desire we cause it to be ke'ein kamei hechrachi, as if like God gets trapped here, the air gets trapped. Till our behavior, till bchira, you could say yes, there's a flow. The way Hashem set up the kav hamida is what it regulates the flow. And yes, it gets diminished, and there are places where it's very, very diminished, very concealed. But it's still in the control of the regulator. The pipe is still controlling the regulation. So as we said, regulated flow, or tzimtzum ritzeni, just like Hagbolah ritzeni, is not a real Hagbolah, because it's part of the plan. Let's speak a practical example. Let's say you set up a system, let's say you have pipelines coming from the source, and these pipes have to get more and more diminished as they come to the homes, until they come to a point where a little faucet, and you get a trickle of water. But that's the way you planned it. So yes, it's a tzimtzum, but it's a tzimtzum ritzeni. That's exactly the plan. You want it that way. So in a sense, it's not called a real tzimtzum, because you planned it. It's not the thing is controlling you. No one's being held hostage here. But what happens if somebody comes and says, "Oh, there's a little trickle here," and they decide they're going to use it because no one's watching, so to speak. It's not in the middle of the reservoir. Someone uses the trickle for something inappropriate. So suddenly now, my plan was that should come as a trickle for benefit, your benefit. You used it now for negative, so in a way you've taken advantage, you've abused essentially the trickle, so to speak. You've abused the tzimtzum, and now it becomes kein achrachi, now you've taken hostage. Now of course you could say God can do whatever He wants, but He's bound Himself, that's what He says. Kavyoch, He's bound Himself in the Neshamas. Well, before we go there. But let's not even go to Neshamas Yisrael yet. So this is the story. So that's what I said. If the father hides from his child, the point of the hiding is tzimtzum ritzeni. That's what he wants. And then the child discovers the father, and it's a big simcha. And you forget about the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum was only a means. But what happens if the child stops looking, or whatever, the father hid himself so well, and starts convincing himself the father doesn't exist? My father's not hiding, he doesn't exist. Like the famous mashal the Mittler Rebbe gives of the people living down underground. So the first generation, they know that they were put here in prison, and that the food comes from above. Then a few generations later, they say, "No, this is our life. This is where we belong." So it's no longer a tzimtzum ritzeni. Now it becomes kein achrachi, which means it's like a hostage being taken. So the nitzutz aleki, which was meant to come to a world like ours, diminished in order for us to reveal it, has now become trapped here. Kavyochel. That's what it means, trapped. A certain form of trapped. Kavyochel, I keep saying. Ke'ein hachrachi. As he says, Kamoy hachrachi, kavyochel. Okay, 1 second. Now, which is also we speak about Shel Shtib Satmez. What do we say Shel Shtib Satmez? One mashal, one example the Alter Rebbe Rashab gives, I think it's in Regla Norim, Samachei, or maybe even Ayin Beis, in Ayin Hey, Padr Rishol. He says that it's like Chaticha Nas Nevel of the Nitzutz. Everything has to have a Nitzutz. There's no such thing as something that doesn't exist. Even what it says in Tanya at the end of Perek Aleph, Ein Bem Tev Klal, that Tzemach Tzedek adds, Mitzad Atzmam Ein Bem Tev Klal. Why? Because it's Chaticha Nas Nevel. So a kosher piece of meat falls into a vat of non-kosher, it's kosher. But because it's bottled in the reiv, it's like a cheticha nas nevela. So this kosher no longer. Now, in Inyan, yes, it was never was a non-kosher piece, but now it's become trapped, so to speak. So the nitzutz is nechshach, it says. It becomes so dark. And think of it's like a black hole. What's a black hole? The light is sucked in. The gravitational pull is so powerful of that star, it doesn't even let light escape. So what happens suddenly is everything inverts. The light becomes, the spark becomes so darkened you can't even tell it's there anymore. So then he says,
can we say that the
one second. Then he asks, Agam de'in achrachi ina shaykh lamayla. How could you say even Kavyachal achrachi? So he said, because he bound himself in the Neshamas Yisrael. Was mit sich verbunden Kavyachal. It's a very dikalosh. Was mit sich verbunden Kavyachal. Therefore, he kafi eifan ha'pa'ulus in Neshamas Yisrael lamata pe'el lamayla. V'harizeh chashom k'may shemachrichim. That's where we stopped. So in other words, as I explained, why don't you just say the same thing? His connection to his Yisrael is also the Tzeni. Just like Tzimtzum is the Tzeni. There's a big difference. The Tzimtzum is the Tzeni, it's part of a process. It's not an end in itself. And Shamas Yisrael, at the Kavanah. So yes, it's also his kasha. You could say technically, God could not bind himself to Eden also, and he didn't do a chet. It doesn't affect him. But that's not the plan. The Shamas Yisrael is the destiny of when Eden Chsinas Chinam caused the Churban Beis Hamikdash. The Golus also went into Shechina. Shechina Golus, Shechina Imam. And Kavyachal, you have all the Lushanis that you say, Kalani Bezreya, Kalani Bereshi. You say expressions that God has pain and God has loss and God has some type of Imanech B'tzad, all the different expressions. Obviously, in Inyan you could say God's beyond it all, but it's not the plan and that's not how he did it. He set it up that way.
So how is it possible? Yes, pain and all this, what about any violations and nothing changes?
So there's the questions of Chassidus. That's the whole shittus of Eidus and Kelim, whether Eidus Apshutim or not, for this reason. Some say it's in the Eidus, the effect. In the Chanami. At the end of the day, it's going to be ultimately Nimna Nimnois. That we don't understand what it means exactly. That there's a level where God shows and manifested that way. And remember, there's also a level Im Tzadakta Matiful Bay. But that's Chetzenis HaMakif. The end of the day is that God bound himself, and it's not he bound himself like we bind ourselves. He wants to bind himself, and therefore it's atzmizdika connection, and it does affect, and it doesn't affect at the same time. And this is a different question. It's a good question, but ultimately there's a place that's higher than Leisha Nisi also, because even Leisha Nisi is also a logic. According to the Rebbe, Leisha Nisi is also it's a logic for us. For us, it doesn't make sense that God should have a shinui, so Leisha Nisi is our understanding of Atzmus. But there's a point in Atzmus where even Leisha Nisi shouldn't be a question. Why should he can do whatever he wants, so to speak. I'm just giving you, this is the most contemporary explanation. But if you go without that, basically there are biyurim chassidus. Leisha Nisi is usually explained with oir, like the Eibishter's, the Atzmus is like a moir. The Shemesh is not affected by the Eir. However, with the qualification, the Shemesh must radiate Eir, and Atzmus doesn't have to. So at the end of the day, there's a certain the way he's impacted is not quite the same way. So the impact is more on the Eir and the Kalim. This is what the Mukabalim. That's
when it comes to the Yidden. When it comes to the Yidden, it's more Kesha Atzmi.
So it's deeper, but it ends up coming up down to the same thing. The impact, when you say kaloni, and you say those expressions, you're talking about. In other words, there's a part of Shechina begalusa, but there's a part that is not affected by galusa. Atzmus is built in Mitzias Nimtza. So that level, you can't apply the issues of Shechina begalusa. Shechina begalusa is in Giluyim at the end of the day. It's good questions what you're asking, but it's not really for now. But briefly, that's what it is. Atzmus, remember, is not affected by Helam. Remember, Tzimtzum, this whole discussion is a Tzimtzum that's affecting. Even Tzimtzum that's the Tzeni. Where's Tzimtzum affect? Only Eir. There's no Tzimtzum in Etzem. So the whole thing we're talking about is Eir here. However, here's the key thing. That an Atzmus is Negei of a Stutzach and Eir. That's the key. However, how it affects, instead of what I'm saying, in other words, Atzmus is Negei that the Chet is Gerim Chesadon, and diminishes that as negay in kavanas ha'atzmus. However, in kavanas ha'atzmus, it's not in a form of shinui. It's just that's what the Eibishter will. I wanted to just add. Is that enough explanation for now?
Yes,
the bottom line is the way things play itself out. That we're talking now. For example, Tzimtzum is only an Eir, as we know. The Tzimtzum is not Kipshute, and it's only an Eir, not an Atzim. So anything we talk about here, something is concealed, not concealed, whether it's a willing, a Tzimtzum Ritzeni, or it's a Tzimtzum Kamei Achrachi, you're talking here in Giluyim for sure. However, Giluyim is Negei in Etzem. But the way it affects Etzem is not with a Shinui. The Shinuyim are happening in Giluyim, Yet in Etzem is Negei what's doing in Giluyim. And in Etzem it's not in the form of Shin. Etzem is just that the Eibishter wants, Atzmus wants, that the Giluyim should work themselves out. And that's Negei and Etzem. In other words, it's not a small thing, because if a difference between a Chrochi and not a Chrochi is a major difference. But the word Shinui can only be stated in the world of Shinuyim where there's Giluyim. Okay, so now one point I wanted to make about Klippas Sitra Achra. When we say that, what does it mean that there's energy into Klippas Sitra Achra without human behavior? So look, in Tanya he says that the world is created what? He says the two types of Klippas. The Klippas Nega. Klippas Nega, he says, is everything, every material object in this world is a Klippas Nega. What does it mean? Klippas Nega means like the shell of light. That's what Klippas Nega means. It's a shell of light. But it means that all energy is put inside of a shell. Now these shells are just like we see fruits. Why is it called Klippa? So the Shalos says Klippa means Shema Klippa Lepri. A Klippa is a shell, a skin, a husk, whatever you want to call it. In different fruits and nuts and so on have them. Some are soft, some are very soft, some are thicker, some are very hard. Right. So they explain there are different levels of so-called concealments. So the way the Chashalah puts it beautifully is like this: Klippa is not a bad thing. Klippa is protects the fruit in this material world. It's meant to protect the spark within. But let's say you forget about there's a spark inside. You only remember there's a potato peel or an orange peel. She made the toffel, ikar toffel. That's the problem. So Klippa allows for the potential. We say Klippa doesn't mean Klippa is evil. Klippa allows for the potential that you can convince yourself that everything you're going to do today in your work, the Klippa, that's the ikar. When in truth is, all it is, your work, where you're going to walk, what you're going to eat, is only meant to help you connect to the neshama within it, the ruchnis. So therefore, Klippas in this world have energy without us. The fact that they're concealed, that when you take a fruit on the tree, and the divine, the Kayach Eliki, or Leah Lechem Lavad Yichya Adam, El Kimim Meitzah Pi Hashem, meaning the spark of God in the food, that is not up to us. God created the world, that the sparks are hidden. That's what he says. That's a Tzimtzum Ritzeni. That's what he wants. Now you take the food, instead of eating it with a bracha, or instead of using the energy for something to learn Torah or do mitzvah, you use it to destroy something. That's what means you increase in Klippa more, you're giving it more power. So yes, it had on its own the potential to be misused, but also the potential to be used. An apple in the tree could be eaten with a bracha, and you could take the energy and do a mitzvah with it. But you as a human being have the power to do the opposite. And as such, if you behave and you indulge in it, based on your and stoop to your, succumb to your base indulgences and instincts, that in turn feeds the Klippa more. Basically, is what he said. Just wanted to explain a little. Then, of course, in Tanya brings Shalosh Klippas Atmeis, which is a little more complicated. How could something be Ra on its own? Is a Chazer Shalosh Klippas Atmeis? It's a Achilat Shalosh Klippas Atmeis. A horse. But you can ride on a horse to do a mitzvah. So the Rebbe has letters explaining how do you explain that the same creature is Shalosh Klippas Atmeis when it comes to one thing and not in another. Is it Issa Gavra? Is it Issa Chefta? This is a whole other discussion. That's another, yeah. But a Chazir also, you're allowed to deal in Chazerim. You're allowed to sell and buy. And, is that Chazerim not? Are you sure? Chazir is like Avodah Zarah? You're not allowed to...
No.
If you have a farm...
You're not allowed to make schor something that's also forbidden.
Are you allowed to grow chazerim in Israel?
No. Yeah, also legadol chazerim.
The gadol, but let's say you own a farm. So you're a partner in a farm, and
Farming means also legadol means you're raising them. But if you're allowed to maybe buy them and sell them, I don't know if you're allowed to raise them.
Okay. I didn't mean raise them. I meant to say. What happens if you sell footballs, pigskin?
Yes, they're not really cheaper.
Huh?
So no Easter there. Not selling something to be eaten.
No, I understand, to be eaten. Exactly. My point is this is connected to Achila. That's what I'm saying. Avodah Zarah, you're not allowed anything. You're not allowed to deal with nothing. Anyway, forget. Let's not use chazal. Horses. You have allowed to have a horse. You're allowed to own a horse. You're allowed to ride on a horse, and people rode on horses for mitzvah, but you don't need a horse. In other words, the point is the same nitzuts Depends how it's used. There's letters from the Rebbe how you explain that. Now, however, there's no question that when he says Osir v'kosher b'yidei chetzenim, what means Osir? It's bound. It's actually, in a way, that's like a chrachi. Except there, he doesn't bring that here. Because you could ask, you don't need Avodas Adam. You say Osir, something is Osir, that means you're not allowed to touch it because it's held hostage there. So that would be an example of hachrachi without our Aveda. Here he's obviously talking that we are the ones that cause Klippas Nega to be more trapped. They're not talking about Dvarim Asurim, because they're also even without us. Just qualifying what he said here. It's not a contradiction, because he's still what says it applies. There's no question. For example, God forbid if someone's Ever and Dover Asur, they make the clip even more harsher to get makes it even more trapped. It says which means if you avoid a Dover Asur, in a way you're redeeming the spark.
I think it's only a time factor. After 3 years, it's going to be getting.
This is explained in the Chanami. There's a whole. I just chazed by the Kinus Teda after Pesach. There's a whole series of the Rebbe what Yitzchak Gavra and Yitzchak Hefzer with these matters, because this would seem like it's Yitzchak Gavra. Yitzchak Gavra means, like, for example, Achilas Truma. For a Zod it's Asur, for a Kohen it's Mutter. So it's only Gavra. It's not necessarily in the Hefzer. However, there's also elements of Hefzer that you could explain. Anyway, it's not for now, but the point here relevant to us is that there is what the Klippas get on their own, and there's what we do that cause it to be trapped, so to speak. In Kamei HaCharachi.
The subtle difference is if it becomes a menagid or it's not a menagid. Once you misuse it, it becomes a menagid because it's like you're being menagid the kavod again, or what it was intended to be used. I think that's you can explain it.
I'm not sure what you're explaining with that.
Introduce that word, because I think like if everything goes according to plan, like, even if it's diminished all the way to from the faucet, like you said, so it's fine. It's not menagid. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. But once you take it and you misuse it, you're turning it into something that's.
I would avoid going there also for many reasons. First of all, he's not bringing that. I think even if you don't have to necessarily say that, because like he says in Tanya there, Shalshut Pniz, the Dvarim there are menagdim to Elokus even without our Aveda. There are forces that are menagid, like Amalek, things like that. They're partially menagid, but here it's not so much the word menagid. Here's more that it's that it becomes like chachrich. Before, when he said from the Eitz Chaim, so Eitz Chaim, he said that they says
life to something that's menagid him. That's a chrachi. That's like you're forcing him to.
If it helps you understand it, fine. I don't see necessity to go there, but. When he said before that Tesfiris, they go and they, like you said, that is that the Sfiris themselves are going into the Makam Klippers, not that they're removed. Okay.
They can take a give chayas to the Klippers.
Well, Kamayim Razal, let's continue now. So what we have is Kvi Eifna pulls in Shamis Islamah, Lamata Pelim Lamaila. So it's like, God forbid, like they're compelling, because God bound himself. What does he say in Tanya about the king taking the king's head? Mashlich Reishei? Is it similar to this? Is that the same idea?
You only say it doesn't mention it.
No, I'm just wondering if it's at all. I'm wondering why it doesn't mention if it's the same. Maybe it's not the same idea there. I'll have to look it up. Okay. So now it brings a Maimer Chazal to demonstrate this. Uchamaimer Chazal loy dayan l'rishayin el shematrichen eisei umachtimin eisei bal korchoch. So he says there.
It's not enough that the Rishonim are going against.
Right, not enough that the Rishonim are going against God's will, but they do something else. Matrichen, they say umachtimin. What does machtimin mean? So it almost sounds like a cherem, like machrimin, but I think it's not machtimin, like Moshe Chesem.
to make it dirty, to soil it.
The soil. So matrichin means they matriach.
They're causing him. They're schlepping him.
How do you say in English matriach? They're troubling him. Or machtimine say, and they soil him. Sounds like contaminate him. Balkorchach. Forcibly. Or pirish razal. Gzeidehi milafonai. So Rashi answers. Do you remember where the Gemara is? Okay, we have to look it up. So Rashi basically seemingly bavarning this question. What does it mean? How could they do that to him? So gzeidehi milafonai. God Himself decreed that upon Himself. In other words, He bound Himself. Hainum prinsadais kashrus. So we have to look in the Gemara to really understand it. But essentially, it's clear that the whole thing is a result of God binding Himself. Gzeidehi milafonai. In other words, He made this a gzeira that when you'll behave a certain way, it'll affect me a certain way. So that's the iskashus that He just said. It's interesting that Rebbe Rashab doesn't say was hat sich verbunden. It says was me hat sich verbunden. It's a very deep expression, like in iskashus you say me. It's a very global, like we have bound ourselves more than we. Me. And this achrachi, that we are so-called compelling and holding God hostage, forcibly causing this air to be trapped, has a geruah that's terrible. It's a really horrible thing. The Zayin Melech Oluv. Oh, he does bring Tanya. Okay, right. Okay. The Zayin Melech Oluv. This means a king that is downtrodden. How do we say Oluv? Degraded, downtrodden, shamed. Yeah. What's the word? Where does the root come from? Olive? Shamed. Like shame, like shamed, disgraced. Disgraced. Like it says in Tanya Sefer end of 24, chapter 24.
Olive is more miserable.
Right. Olive sometimes is like Menalovim.
Miserable. Misken.
Verquetscht.
You miserable human being. You're not.
What?
Melech Olav. Also another thing. Melech Olav means as disgraced king. Could be also Melech Olav means a. I want to use a word. There's a word. A Melech Olav. Okay. Does he use the lashon Melech Olav in Tanya? I don't think so. So what does he say in Tanya? Kameshakasav hu asur bezikim. That he's bound in chains. Yeah, also zikim, like chains, like ropes even. I think it's zikim is chains. There's also b'rihitim, it says sometimes.
I thought that's what it was.
That's a different asur. Asur b'zikim. So in other words, what we're doing is, yeah. We're taking and keep causing a trapping. The Rebbe Rashab is really driving the point home. This is a very good chapter to read anytime you're really interested in indulging in your debate. Just read this Pedic and say, okay, before I do it, let's figure out what the consequences are.
What am I doing?
So now he's speaking now in Avedim more. Something that is, God forbid, that's compelled, that's forced. To get rid of that, you need to have an increasing element of bitterness, a real what's the word for it? A real bitterness inside of you, really be pained by it. Which means in times of merirus. Remember, we learned this about davening, that merirus is basically not in morning davening, even though he said there's something me'enza, but it's mainly tikkun chatzos, at night, midnight, when the night is, the world is sleeping. Which means, like tikkun chatzos. What's tikkun chatzos? Tikkun chatzos literally means the repairing of chatzos, the darkness. So during that time, you need a special increasing bitterness, and that is the crying over the Golos Ashchina. that the Shekhinah is in such exile, displaced. You know, it's something like a little, just to give a little halacha example. It says, Gola Talmud is Gailin Rabbi Imeh. So which is for the Talmud far worse than his own Golas. Why was his Rabbi? But he's the teacher. The Rebbe speaks of a beautiful explanation in it, how much a teacher is bound to his student. So it's one thing you're bound in good times, that if the student has to go to Ari Miklat, so the Rav has to go with him. So till then, the Rav was, they were both three. So why? Because the Rav is kashus. He bound himself to his student. It's not that the Rav didn't do anything. Or the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu could not go into Eretz Yisrael ultimately because his generation didn't go. He wasn't part of Chet Egel. So good, there's the Maisa with the Meriva and the stone and so on. But it was, right. So, but because you're bound, the captain goes with the ship, so to speak. You want to explain Gimel Tammuz this way? You could maybe do that too. Okay, so this is Golos HaShechina. I remember the Sichos of Bichur Kesai. Look, the Rebbe gave his whole life for Mashiach. Kipshute. Made it very clear. Der Hashvi, Alazach. So when it didn't happen, and he said, so in a sense, like Moshe, until Mashiach is B'Pashtus, the Rebbe can't be here, B'Gashmis, because it's the Shlichus. He can't be here if Mashiach is not here, let's put it this way. At some point. The time came. I'm not saying this is an explanation, I'm just giving you a thought. But it's a thought, because the Rebbe made an effort for this. He made it his mission. So in a way, it's like at this point, either Mashiach is here and then the Rebbe is here. He's not here, I can't be here either. B'Gashmis, that is. Makes sense to me. Especially giving us something to do. As you know, I don't believe that there's any change in anything. There's no going back. The clock doesn't go backwards. It only goes frontwards. But he could say that. I mean, the Rebbe basically said those words. He said, "Chigiton als was wilter for me." In other words, like
11 months that.
I mean, I would love that the Rebbe was here. Trust me, if I bring him again. But in a way, it came almost like Moleh says. The deadline came. Mashiach was supposed to come.
11 months later.
Exactly. And then he was mukuyim what he said.
11 months of Kaddish.
Exactly, mukuyim what the Rebbe himself said. And then he's 2 years he waited in a way, like watching. Get up his tons and nisht.
Somehow I think he was talking to him.
Well, that gets you off the hook, that's for sure.
First, I gets me off the hook. I'm still hanging on the hook. It doesn't help. Come on.
First of all, what's a steer? The Rebbe Kaned L'maylo and L'mata. He spoke to above and spoke below. Because I cannot take the Rebbe's in ein milim midei pshute. He said, "Tut was kennt." Someone said, "As andere men as gesagt, tut was wilt." They said, "Tut was kennt." Right?
People cast it.
I just saw it settle, a very powerful settle to Moshe Hecht at New Haven. He writes to the Rebbe will help him with Moshikan Epis at Solid in New Haven. So the Rebbe schreibt, Torim Yikrov Ani Ena, Kena Sisi Kvar Mekama Shonim Sheshalachti Harav Rab Moshe Hecht in New Haven. V'apele hu shaloi ba'atzmei Mishayir HaKecha sheyesh loi, shenot nitnu loi. Hast du einen Empfer? He's writing to the Rebbe, so Shikna Hatzal, help. So that, whatever, money, ich weiß, Matzev. So the Rebbe wrote, Terem Yikrov Ani Nen, ich hatte schon geschickt, einen Empfer. Ich hab dir geschickt. And you're not Mishayir, you're eigene Kechas. So the Rebbe answered. Very powerful answer. I love it.
Yeah.
I just saw the same thing with Simcha Gorodetsky, because then that settled Gimel Tammuz, Chavov. Wow. He writes the Rebbe wrote a Michtav Kloli on Gimel Tammuz Tovshin Chavov. Michtav Kloli Prati rather. Where he would add on the bottom to different people. So he writes whatever Niskabel and Dalet Tammuz. So this the Rebbe wrote Dalet Tammuz. I mean, the letter is dated Gimel Tammuz, but he sent it the next day.
Yeah, because it's 10 days before you already sent it. The whole mindset.
I didn't know this story.
But it doesn't. It's only epistic nicht.
Oh, no, one second. I just saw it with the mucker and the letter itself.
I saw the whole thing also.
Yes. Anyway, let me just tell you the story. Why it doesn't stim? It stims very well.
Okay, Lord,
The date doesn't stim.
No, the letter. Think about it. Does stim. One second.
In Gimel Tammuz he says
It wasn't. The Michtav Klali Prati was written, dated Gimel Tammuz.
Yeah.
So you have a letter.
Yeah.
The Rebbe didn't send a letter out on Gimel Tammuz to everybody. Some people he sent it the next day, 5 days later. People got the letter. The letter wasn't sent necessarily on Gimel Tammuz. It was mailed in the next few
It
days.
was written in Gimel Tammuz.
The Klali Prati. But then the Rebbe added. But then he got it. Here's a Michtav Klali Prati. He got a pan from Simcha Derdetsky the next day. Okay. And on the letter of Gimel Tammuz, the Rebbe wrote, "Niskabel Hapan." This is common; it happened all the time. I myself have letters like that from the Rebbe.
I'll show it to you. You'll see that.
No, I just told you, because you think Gimel Tammuz means it went out already. It didn't necessarily go out. When people sent pans to the Rebbe, he would take his Michtav Klali Prati and write things, even a week later. He didn't write a new letter.
in addition to whatever is
That was like a photocopy, a Nusach Klali that went to everybody.
That in Gimel Tammuz says your letter from Dalet Tammuz I received. How is that possible?
He added that the next day on the same printed letter. You don't know how Michtav Klali Prati was a piece of paper like this.
Yeah.
It was printed.
Right.
The Rebbe had 100 of them.
Right.
When someone would send him a note, let's say on Dalet Tammuz, the Rebbe would add, Ampan, the Dalet Tammuz, Kibalti. So in addition to the printed letter on the bottom, it said Ampan was. So he wrote it the next day. He sent it sent it on Dalet Tammuz.
Okay.
That's how it went. It always went that way. The Rebbe would have these letters, and he would use them as people sent in letters. I saw people got a Gimel Tammuz could have gone the base Tammuz too.
And he just added it on the bottom.
He added the Ksav. The Pan is written. The Kibalti Apan is B'Ksav Yad, written on Dalet Tammuz. That's an addition.
Your letter of Dalet Tammuz that Rebbe writes, I received, and it was dated Gimel Tammuz. So now you're explaining how it's possible. Okay.
No, the letters were printed. Maybe they printed the Shchedesh Tammuz.
No, it said Gimel Tammuz on it.
What?
It said Gimel Tammuz.
It's a printed letter. It's like the Rebbe taking a letter that's on print and adding something. He could add a year later.
But that printed letter, it said Gimel Tammuz, right?
Yeah. That was a Michtav Klali Prati that.
So on the bottom you wrote that your letter that you wrote on Dalet Tammuz I received.
Meaning the next day the Rebbe took the printed letter and wrote that.
Yeah.
But he did it for many.
It wasn't the next day, it was later because it took at least 2 weeks for the mail to get here.
I don't know.
The letter on Dalet Tammuz. It says your letter, Dalet Tammuz.
The Rebbe wrote it, however, the Rebbe wrote that on Dalet Tammuz.
Whatever, he could have had
It's very
it in.
important.
What's
It's very part of the whole. It's part of the whole thing. He was in Russia, right? And he wrote to the Rebbe a letter.
He was in Israel.
He was in Israel. It took a week for the letter to get here.
I don't know.
It took a couple of days.
Who cares?
Okay,
But
because
the Rebbe received it, Dalet Tammuz.
But he wrote it on Dalet Tammuz. Simcha Gedetsky wrote it on Dalet Tammuz. Now he received it on Dalet Tammuz.
Okay, you have to look at the
The
Lashon.
letter of Dalet Tammuz I received.
Fine, so be it. So, what's the problem?
Okay, fine.
So I'm telling you, but the Rebbe did it. Listen, what would the Mechtavim Klolim Pratim? You're not thinking practically. Mechtavim Klolim Pratim were letters that the Rebbe would send out to people. He sent them out over a period of, it could be over a period of a month.
And he had a stack of these printed letters and he just kept on writing.
Yeah, and he kept writing on them based on what people would write to him. Instead of writing a whole letter to them, he would use this main letter and add things.
So it was about a week.
There was the same letter sometimes have 50 different versions of additions to different people.
About a week later.
Yeah, and it could be even more than a week. The Rebbe would send it for a period of time. Yeah, that was the point. So listen what he saw. He wrote to the Rebbe that he feels deprived, that the Rebbe is not, feels sad. The Rebbe is not zeichet to an answer from the Rebbe. So the Rebbe writes, "Kibalti et tapan." Lepella that he writes this that he's not zeichet when your son and your son-in-law just received exit visas. What's it called? What's the last name? Heter Yitzias from Medina Hi. Ve'en lechamayna g'dei lemezah. No better answer than that. And the later Chizgevisen that the Russians signed the exit visas on Dalet Tammuz, and they received them 10 days later. But that's that part. That's the miracle part. But even without that, the Rebbe's answer doesn't always come in an answer. Sometimes comes in your life. That's the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, no, but that's why it was important to know the date, because that was the date that the Russians signed on it.
Yeah. Anyway. Shalmanish said, "V'in Golos Hashchina." Dariat Tzimtzum. I remember a sikha from the Rebbe on the Kut Lev Yitzchak Pasha B'Chukesai. Ima Astem, V'im Ga'altem. You know that lashon. So what's the lashon that he saw bebotzra? The Eibishter is like ongetan belevushe, covered with blood.
Zevach Hashem B'Batza.
Yeah, Zevach Hashem B'Batza. So the Rebbe speaks there, Meredith Kasicha. In Zeir B'Chukesa, he talks about a mashal from a bursaki, where someone goes to look for his child. He doesn't know where his child is. His child is found, same he's in a bursaki, he's in basically a tanner, where it's gefährlich reach, terrible smell there. And says the Eibishter goes there, and asked him, that even though the child is all this, the Eibishter himself goes there, and even though he picks up, so to speak, the smell, the mashal, the father will go there, even though it may affect him, because it's his son. The Rebbe spoke, I remember, it was a Meredith Fabre, I think it was B'Chukei Mem Aleph. Spoke this whole thing of the Eibishter is bound to the neshamas down here. Huh? Yeah. It's printed. So be in Likud Levi Yitzchak, on the Zehar there. The Bursaki, I remember, he says, and I gave in Bursaki, I think it was B'Chukei, and also Sazri Mitzeda, I think that year. It was the Birchas Achama year. Mem Aleph it was. There was a Meredith Kasicha about how the father goes, and he'll go whatever it takes. That's what he says, that the Eibishter says sometimes that he puts on Levushim, his Levushim are covered with blood because he's going to save. What does that mean? Because he bonds himself. This few lines here is very, to me, reminiscent of many of the Rebbe Sichos. You know, the Golos HaShechina, where you cry for the Eibishter. That at Tzimtzum Shal, you say, and now he's going back to the question. Now, all these two explanations that he gave, especially the second one, is what happens through our actions. Our actions increase, as he said, and not only increase, cause the tzimtzum, increase the klippas getting energy, but also causes the kavyochel, so to speak, that the tzimtzum becomes like forced. Like we said earlier. The tzimtzum, according to the cosmic order, the scheduled tzimtzum, so to speak, even though that it transmits and draws energy into the sitra achra, the other side, that's not called golus. When God created the world, He created shkotzim or moshim, and He created a world where the divine sparks are concealed in the darkest places. Dvarim asurim, like we spoke before, things that are the sparks are concealed. That's not called golus, because that's not compelled. That's interesting type of golus. Ve'inyan ha-golus ve'inyan ha-achrachi, chaz v'shalom. Shegeirim in the Maila. Golus is more than that. Golus is a displacement. Golus is hostage, captivity. That's achrachi. That's achrachi. It's captivity. It's imposed. It's imposed upon us. It's a word I always use when I speak freedom. People say, "What's free?" People think freedom means I can go anywhere I like. No, freedom means that where you go is not imposed upon you. There can be a Yid sitting under a chassid, under a talis for 8 hours on Shabbos and not moving, and he's freer than another guy that's running everywhere. Because he's not doing it because it's imposed upon him. He wants to do it. The other guy running around may be running out of fear and afraid to be in one place for too long. Understand? So it's not about mobility. Huh? Yeah. So it's about, if you want to be there, then you're not in prison. If you don't want to be there, you're in prison. It doesn't matter what it looks like. There's a guy I know, he comes from a very, very wealthy, tremendously wealthy family. He tells me, I live in a gilded cage. However, it's a cage that's 5,000 miles wide. He can go anywhere in the world whenever he likes, because he has all the money in the world. Private jets, alle Sachen. But it's a cage. He can go nowhere, really.
Why is it a cage?
Because it's his father's money, and his whole his whole life. He has nothing. He's accomplished nothing, basically. So he's and he knows it. So he's in terrible pain. It's like someone giving you everything. No complete nemad chsufa. No kav shalei. What's going to do to you? You have a comfortable life, but you'll be in prison. It's a glorified prison. It's like living in a palace. I know a person in France. She grew up. She said, "My house, I had 65 nannies, and a palace that had maybe 1,000 rooms, but there was no love in this house. There was no love. She got no love." So
everybody who doesn't have money has love in the house.
No, but but there you're not living in the illusion that you're free.
You know the truth.
There you're entrapped. Here comes a chayda and all's good. Look, why you're living in a palace.
Yeah.
Cues.
People told me a chassan in Russland, mis gesessen auf a bank mit a few milk cartons. and they ate a few herring. It was more freedom than what you see sometimes here. Dr. Baranov, Professor Baranov used to tell me, he said to me, once he came out of Russia, he lost something. He says, there we set Yutas Kislev in the basement, and could be arrested. We thought we were holding up the world. You know, whether we knew it's true or not, but we thought we were holding up the world with our little sitting here, because the whole world is this, burning, and we're like, if we don't do it, the whole world falls apart. Then you come out here, and you can verbringen ganzen Tag, ganze Nacht, wenn du willst, there's no threats.
Yeah.
Significance of your actions. It's a Hatzike chapter here. See, the Rebbe Rashab moved into a different territory here. It's a big, and that's the Sfiras Agnuzis. Lifnei HaTzimtzum is Marain Krochen Da and Tzimtzum Be'achrachi. That's a pretty big jump. You able to handle it?
Free fall.
So that's what Golus is. That's the Het HaKrecht von Ha'id. Ve'in HaGolus ve'in HaKrochi Chashu. Greidim L'mayla, that's caused or above. V'hu inyan Nisonani biyodi la'uchel kum.
What is this? This is nicht Tire. Tire? No. I was given over into my hands.
Sonani biyodi. And I cannot stand up, and I cannot stand up. Like in other words, you're trapped. You trapped yourself. Like, you went in with the Chveizvas, and then you got yourself stuck. Das ist in Buddha steht. You know what it is? Okay, back to the Kunkanansia. Back to the videotape.
No, it's fine.
Sanani biyadi like ochel kum. Ah man, that's a strong word. Now, it's a perfect example, by the way, when we do something that's self-destructive. You give yourself, okay, do what you want. Give my hand, and then you get yourself, I can't get out of here.
That's the rich Golus.
Yeah, this is self-imposed. Okay. And for this we need to have the bitterness of the spirit be yeser increasingly sheyasa chesben benafshe, to make a chesben benafshe, which means an accountability, to give a chesben aduch, to be accountable in your soul, v'yizbeinen b'zehetiv, and to contemplate well on this. Gut iberechnen zech test. Gut iberechnen zech zekter. From. That was a good iberechnen zech. You have to really review this soul search. This is a serious soul search. V'yismarmen benafshe, and you have to have that. The ismarmen is another form of mirirus, and benafshe should feel embittered. So what frees something that's become captive and trapped forcibly is the deep mirirus. You know the famous story where the guy went to the Rebbe Rashab for a bracha, and the Rebbe Rashab didn't give it to him, so he went outside, started crying. The Razok came over, what are you crying? So he said, the Rebbe's not giving me a bracha. So he goes back to he goes to his brother and he says, what's it does beside Rebbe? That's what you're a Rebbe for, to give brachas, not to have Jews cry. So he says, send him in again. He goes in again, he gets the bracha. And the story goes that Rebbe Rashab saw he needed that. He couldn't give him the bracha without the cry. He needed the crying breaks. Because if you don't cry over this problem, if you don't cry that someone's held hostage, then how exactly are you getting out of there? So it's the deep tears and the deep bitterness that frees, because it's awareness. Like the chassid that went down in Russia, there was no air conditioning, hot days. They went to cellars, but cellars were also no electricity. There was no light. So chassid comes downstairs. Someone said it's a story that Rebbe tells, and he says, "Azay das finster. It's so dark here." So someone who was there already for a while says, "Don't worry, you'll soon get used to it." So he says, "That's exactly what I'm worried about." Did something get disconnected?
No.
Okay. They're going to get used to it. Some cheshech leir. Good iberechnes. That's the free. So the divine energy is freed. Like tshuva. What is tshuva? From the word hashava, return. To return. What does it say? V'shava shem l'kecha shuvcha. Messian. Hashava the Eid Eliki sheyered b'makam haklipa. That what is hashava? It's the hashava, the Eir Eliki. It's the return of the divine energy that descended into the place of Klippa because of the trap of our. Harihu Meishave say Shemetzia Ma Klippa Mailose Maleo rather. He returns it and frees it. Metzia Ma Klippa. He frees it. Metzia takes it out. He tracks. Oh, Eicha.
That's why nobody knows.
We never listen to it.
Once a year, can't you?
I'm like one guy told me, I once brought him to Eicha Tishba. He says, I'm depressed enough, I don't need to hear this. So I said, okay, read Megillas Esther. Pour him. One Megillah or another.
How do you say Eicha in English?
Lamentations.
Over there it says like tyranny.
Yeah, that's the Latin. But Lamentations, which means B'chiyas. Eicha. B'chiyas.
Eicha means weird, no?
Whoa.
Whoa.
Eicha, v'oivei. Yeah. No, Eicha could be Eicha, where are you? But Eicha, that's what it says. There's Eicha positive, where are you? Ayeka.
Right.
But Eicha can be whoa. It's lamentation. It's Eicha Yoshua. How you say, yeah. So he's Metzia Maklipa Maleo. He takes him out of the clip and elevates him. Same thing through by contemplating well in this. You found the meaning? If you give me Eretz Nach right here, you see Eretz Nach, the second one, not the. There's a big one, a very big one. The next one, right near it. What's the pasuk? What's the Aleph what? Aleph Yudalet?
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's a Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek is as the Shemus Anecha. Aleph Yudalet. We need an English one. This is not Odor Charavan Abislo.
You can buy an article in English one. That's it.
Aleph Yudalet?
Yeah.
For pasuk before is Mamorim?
Yeah. The Targum actually explains it. Masla Hashem Yossi Bidoi Mandalei Siachel and Alamekon.
What's Mamorim? Okay, no. Mamorim Shalachesh, right? That's what it says first, right? Okay, we got to look it up. Fine. So by through the same thing, through contemplating well on this mismar v'nafshe and bitter and he should be feeling bitter in his spirit. That's negele b'pnimius nafshe. It bothers him in the depths of his spirit. How do you make eir eliki? So just like the tshuva, same thing is another way of doing it is through b'mizbayin heitiv. You are able to make eir eliki, able to free and redeem the divine energy. And afterwards in davening, in other words, this is Tikkun Chatzos. And afterwards in davening, shemeir etzlo gili er b'nafshe, that when it radiates inside of him, remember back to the previous chapter. He's going now the other. Now, remember he said this whole chapter was coming to say, before we spoke in the previous chapter, how do you eliminate the supply lines? The main thing was through davening, where you spoke about where you contemplate to the point where it awakens in your heart, in Pnimius Nafshe, Pnimius Levave, Pnimius Alev, Rusad Liba, and that awakens the Pnimius Hamakif, etc. That's how you prevent the supply. Now he's going back to repair. So same thing is, this is also feeding the supply lines of the Klippas is also dependent on us. And how do you repair it? He's going back. First you need to, now he's going, in other words, there he was talking how to prevent it, so there you don't need the bitterness. Because you're not preventing it. So all you need to do is make sure God fills your heart, so you feel completely consumed with the divine. That prevents it. But if God forbid something like this happens, first you need the bitterness, Tikkun Chatzos. Then comes the davening, and he's going back to now what he said in the previous chapter. That his whole inner desire and will and desire is in Gavain. To that you cause the cutting off. You cut off the supply lines in the two methods that we spoke about in the previous chapter. And also here. And all this happens through tefillah. And definitely now he's going back to Teira. Remember, the whole thing began with Zmudas Hayelichukecha with David HaMelech. So he went to tefillah. Now remember, David was speaking about Teira. So he says V'kolshkein, that this is done through Teira. The liyashat Teira b'chinas chachma, being that Teira is chachma, as we learned, so the whole point of tefillah was what? If you remember, he spoke about how you be makbil the makif into pnimi, that it should not allow for unikas chetzenim. So you have the pnimius hamakif, and the chetzenis magnigrar, the outer makif follows it, and it also fills up that it doesn't allow the tzimtzumim. That's the whole thing where he spoke at the end of the previous chapter, how the pnimi affects the makif. The bli gvul affects the gvulin, essentially. So he's saying this is definitely so. If it's so by davening does it, definitely Teira, because Teira is chachma. So it's really affecting pnimis. When a person learns Teira, they're filling themselves up with a lakus.
So what is this, two different methods?
Tefillah is more mamata l'mayla and Teira is mamayla l'mata. That's usually the difference. Yeah, it's two methods. Yeah. See, remember, David said Tehillim, it was Tefillah basically, but he also, Tehillim is also sefer from the Chav Dalet Sifrei Kei, it's also Teira. And he's speaking Zmiras Hayelech L'Kach, he's speaking about the mile of Teira. It's just basically, he's connecting it all to the ideas that he's discussing here.
One's got to precede the other?
Well, listen, the Seder is Tikkun Chatzos, Beis HaKnesses, LeBeis HaMedrash. You go from Tefillah to Teira, yeah. So that is the order. Okay, so there's Gilead and Makif. So this is about Tefillah, the Makif comes in Pnimius. Okay, good. And definitely Teira, because Teira is Chachmeh. The Zeo Shekosav im Tagbir Kanesher Meshom Eridcha Nuhum Havaya. This is what says im Tagbir Kanesher. He's bringing all the psukim, man, alive. So we had im Tagbir Kanesher before. Remember? Kanesher. Nesher Derech B'Shamayim. Where was that? Where was that? It was the previous chapter. Oh, it was bottom of page 346. Mamish, the last line.
Last line. Shimon Vav.
That was the Chitzain, that was the Klippa. Now he's speaking positive. Im tagbir kanesha misham. If you will lift yourself up like an eagle, misham, there I will bring. From there I will bring you down. Hashem. Davaya b'chachma. He's speaking here in the negative or in the positive? Im tagbir means here like gaiva.
Yeah. Is it pasuk? Yeah.
But here too, that's what he means here. Im tagbir kanesha, like an amakif. From there I'll bring you down into pnimius. That's it. That's what he's saying. Chachma, havaya chachma. Because remember we said Avdabar Havaya is chachma. Because when the makif we spoke is drawn down to the pnimi, then the klippa cannot receive from that detached place. Basically, it's the tikkun to im tagbir kanesha. If you go lift yourself up
above the klippas.
No, but
here, it's. I think he's touching a pnimius dikatach.
It's in the shetach in this pasuk.
I think he's not saying tagbir kanesher if you go up to gaiva. Here he's saying tagbir kanesher. If you go lift yourself up to the pnimius amakif, so to speak, from there I'll bring it down into the pnimi. That's what it looks like. And the same thing will not be able to wean, to glean, to nurse, to suckle energy from the intent, from the many concealments. Like we learned earlier, chapter 171, the previous chapter. And now he concludes like this. And this is why Matan Teira, which is Teira, is with an Aleph. It starts with Aneich Hashem Lekach. The Bria Se'elam Haya Bebeis. Bereshis Bara Lekim. Bria Se'elam start with a base. There's the different reasons given for this. The whole sikha, the 4 different reasons that it brings. What does the Zohar say? There's different reasons given why the Teira began with a base, not an Aleph. Mishum the Isa the Aleph Rosh Tevis Order. the Zohar says, because Aleph is Rosh Teva's a curse. V'yochel gam order Kanan lekabel. So it could be order Kanan, that Kanan was cursed, lekabel to receive. So he's saying that's why the Torah didn't want to begin with an Aleph, because Aleph can also mean order, and which can also mean a negative. What was he adding with order Kanan lekabel?
It's very important this thing because Beis you can also find the curse with Beis, and with Gimel you can also find the curse. So it's only Aleph.
And also Aleph can be a positive thing, like a nechi.
Yeah, exactly.
So he says because it could be.
Because then the Order Canaan, which means the nation of Canaan, which means the Klippus. Klippus is one design.
Yeah, Gam Order Canaan, the Kabul. They could also be receiving.
They'll receive from the Klippus.
Right, exactly. No, it's like a makif if you start with an aleph. That even though aleph can mean other things, but it also includes the order. But how does that answer the
Order Canaan? No, because Order Canaan is part of the Klippus.
Right.
So Canaan will be able to glean from the Torah if it starts with the aleph.
Exactly. But if it starts with a beis, you said beis, you also have klippus.
But it's not Canaan, Order Canaan. It doesn't start with a beis.
Okay. Fine.
What does it say, Ar Canaan?
It's a pasuk, order Canaan. Canaan will be cursed.
Canaan is one of the Zion Klippus of Meis.
Right. Not Zion Klippus, Zion Umis. Zion.
Which is a
The Zion Midas Rois. Yeah.
Directly responsive. So if you just say Order because Order, you can find other letters that also start that are cursed.
So, but Ar is the only word that associates with Canaan?
Canaan says order on Canaan.
It's a cursed nation. Meaning,
the bottom line, if it said Aleph is like a makif in this sense. It means order. It's order, which means also order Canaan. Also Canaan, which is order, could also receive. That's why the creation of the world was word with beis, which is Rosh Teva of bracha. Say why Matan Teira ba'Aleph? Lias kala der Teira gama Aleph nimshach b'chinas pnimi. By creation of the world, like we learned before, there's a force that goes into Klippa, a minimal force. So if you used an Aleph, it would have given them energy. By Teira, once it's Teira is nimshach b'pnimis. The whole thing of Teira is pnimis. Once you have pnimis, in other words, if you don't have pnimis, the Aleph can go the wrong place. If you have pnimis, the Aleph can go in the right place. That's the point. The Aleph is the makif here. In other words, the Aleph by B'ris Elam would have been machitzenius hamakif, and could potentially give power to the negative. The Aleph in Matan Teira is pnimius hamakif, and it's makif that comes into pnimi, to Teira. So Gam Aleph nishul b'chinas pnimi al kein iyaf shalem lekabel. That's why we're not afraid, not concerned about it. In other places it says once you started the Teira with beis bracha, and you're ready bavor in that, so then you can bring Aleph. And the Aleph doesn't mention that here, but okay, it's interesting. Taich. Well, but Teira Gufa and in Teira, everyone understands it so far. And Teira itself, Hichrisa mebeis haifanim. Hakrisa mebeis haifanim hu ayde mitzvusesa mitzvusesa. And how in Teira do we do the cutoff of the supply lines from both ways? Through positive mitzvahs and negative. Through avoiding and protecting, through avoiding the negatives, by avoiding the negative things, you cut off their energy flow, their trickle from the many concealments. And through the mitzvah, through positive, you bring down makif into pnimi, because it's an action.
It's like the bitter. No sasa. To prevent it to break the clipper.
I don't know if it's like the bitterness, because the bitterness he was speaking about
is before both of those creases.
The
bitterness is before
the bitterness is a result of the negative. Well, we cause the ribut tzimtzum hechrachi, tzimtzum hechrach. The bitterness is talking on the second form of klippa, not from the chitzenius makif.
No, but the bitterness is coming to be mesaka, not coming to be kuris.
Right.
I thought it was kares, so therefore we could fix.
The krisa happens the next day, but
therefore we can fix. In other words, the bitterness at night broke the klippa. And so Lo Saseh here sounds like it's breaking the klippa, making mamsheh.
Now this is already a later stage. If someone, God forbid, fed the klippas additionally and to the point that it became like forced, there they must have the bitterness to break that. That's a separate thing. Once that's done, then you go back to the positive, just like the preventive from here on, tefillah and teira. Remember, if let's say someone didn't do that, we already also learned teira and tefillah avoid, prevent. We're talking about here the preventive, or what comes afterwards. After the bitterness is to counter the increased galus, the galus ashchina. This is not about galus ashchina. This is about preventing, cutting off, not allowing the energy to flow into the negative elements. What's the explanation for this? Explanation is pretty simple, because milaisa means you're avoiding negative things. Avoiding negative things is really
You don't machshir them.
You're not
You
breaking
break them. You're
keeping the
you're starving them.
right. Yeah, you could say that you're like starving them. So they would generally be able to take from the ribui tzimtzumim. But since you're avoiding going there, because Leisa deals with things that dvarim asurim. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do that. You're not talking about positive energy. You're talking about negative. You're avoiding the negative. As you avoid the negative, you're basically, like you said, starving them. It's a good way to put it. Mitzvah sesa is a different thing. Mitzvah sesa is bringing light into it. You're doing something. Tzedakah, Shabbos, Kashrus. So what is mitzvah sesa? Mitzvah is mamshech. What is it mamshech? It's mamshech pnimi, makif to pnimi. Yeah, it's an act. Which means you're bringing something that would have been detached, and you're bringing it into an action, a positive action.
They can't have any access to it.
Yeah.
But when it's detached, they can have access to it.
Yeah. And the same thing, they just spoke about the two types of mitzvahs in Torah. The same thing is through Torah in general, that it cuts off both supply lines. And this is now he's concluding. And this is what David, during his suffering, physical suffering, he said, Zmira, your rules, your Torah, was songs for me. The cause for all the non-good things in physical comes from klippa and sitrach. Why is that? Because not disconnected. If a person is having physical difficulties, let's say in health or parnosa or fear or in this case danger and so on, it's not disconnected. It's because when elikus is made, when you have a divine revelation, if there's a gilead eliki, the divine energy is radiating, then also you have an abundance of gashmis. The time of the Beis Hamikdash, because there was also divine revelation Baruchnis, that's why also begashmis there was an abundance. People lived in peace. Everyone had their home.
We have an abundant of gashmis.
It's a good shaila. He didn't say here that when you have abundant gashmis, it means you have abundance of ruchnis. He says when you have abundance of ruchnis, you have abundance of gashmis. That's what he says. A big difference. Like it says, I remember that everyone saying, "Ein lecha ben chen el misha eseg b'teira." It doesn't say kol misha leim b'teira is a ben chen. Ein lecha ben chen el misha eseg b'teira.
But the b'pashtus to get answer, the answer is b'pashtus nachasreif mit menreich after the holiday.
That's another story. That's one. No, but I wanted to first say that. In other words, gashmis doesn't mean ruchnis. Ruchnis means gashmis. You could ask another question. In the Middle Ages, had a lot more ruchnis than we did. They didn't have gashmis. That's what you could ask. So that one answer is what you're saying, that now Yanocha Sefer et Menach, and that we have the skusim of previous generations, and it's coming to Mashiach's times.
The skusim of previous generations, you could also say 3 generations ago, and they had the most poverty.
No, but but now more than ever.
To 3 generations later, when you're talking about the
why not?
span of
Why not?
generations?
Zeirashvi. Yeah, we're coming close to Gula.
I understand, but 3 generations ago wouldn't make such a big difference. It has more to do with the shift.
Why mathematics doesn't work for you? Why 3 think is mathematics? The Holocaust.
When they didn't have all the schools from all the previous
So that's
800 generations, and 3 generations later we do have
that Moshe. Yeah, but there was one little thing. 6 million Jews were killed in 3 generations.
That's exactly what I said.
So it takes us more than 3 generations.
In between, yeah.
Yeah, but it's also
their Mesiras Nefesh that they were.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. Nicht alle sein reich ein Tag. It's another story. Okay, bottom line is there's Riba Gashmis. Gam Ken Shei Ishtach Zgafin Itach is a person under his vineyard, and this one lived under his fig tree. So therefore, when you say that David HaMelech didn't have good, means that there was a lack of, because Klippa was dominating. And the negative in Gashmis, which meant for David's suffering, was because there was a increasing concealments and cover-ups that come from Klippa. And that's why David wanted to deal with. This is what David says, remember we said that. Besides that besides the fact that Torah, compared to Torah, nothing in this world is significant at all. So that was Mesameachim. Who caters from Zamer as a klipa v'achitzenim. Through Torah he cuts and uproots the klippas, the shells, the husks, and the chitzenim, and the negative energies. So all this is narichas to explain Zmiris, what means Zamer.
Zamer Aritzim.
Yeah, Zamer Aritzim is the second touch. Cutting. That's the whole arichas here. And this is all what David said, and as we're going to say, this was not what was appropriate.
It's not deep enough. It's not.
No, this is the Chitzenius HaTeira. It's a Teira. This is Teira. This is like what Teira does in its sleep.
No, it also is Moshe singing, right? And
that's what it is. Yeah. Well, before Zmiris singing was Sameach Nafshe. Yeah. He doesn't really bring that mamish, but he says his madam is here by the end of the Medrash, the Yalkut. He brings the 3 Pirushim as Zmiris. Clearly, it's connected. Let's put it this way: when you are able to find ways to be cut off the supply lines of the enemies, it's a good reason to dance. It's a gate beidaveng. Simcha can do it, or they bring Simcha. Here it's mashma more that it's bringing Simcha. That's how it was Sameach Nafshe. It's interesting. Taich. The thing with it, that there's Mirzah Chukecha, that Adigdu Kal, is this from the Chassidus or is this this is Bavus? That's what it meant. Yeah, is that like a Chiddush from here, or is it the Pashta Pshat in what he says Mirzah Chukecha? I have to look it up. Okay, let's do the Kitzur. Oh, he brings in the Kitzur the first line, doesn't even say in the chapter. How do you like that? Gama Se'elam Nasan B'Liba Shaladam. So he's bringing, remember he said everything is telling the Neshamas Yisrael, he's bringing a proof, because it says, Gama Se'elam, also the world was given in the heart of a person, which is proof that the whole world is dependent on us. This is not in the Pnim, they suffer. Through arrogance, or through degradation, decadence, ba'avazaris, in foreign loves, foreign desires, Geidman Beis Hayanikas. It's a very good summary, very short and sweet. It causes both sucklings, both Yanikas. What do you say about?
I looked it up. It's not many.
Yeah, both gleanings. B'teisvus Yanika, with additional Yanika, giving it additional. V'gam shatzimtzum mitzadatmu tzimtzum ritzeni. And also, like he said, even Gerua Yesa, worse, the Tzimtzum on their own, the concealments are desired, willed. The Be'emes ain't that Tzimtzum V'agbola. And for in truth, that's not really a concealment and a limitation when it's willed. Uba'ashiflus hanal, but through the degradation, through the decadent or the lowly behavior, it caused that it should be almost like forced. Like it's forced, God forbid. For Union Melech Olav, this is the shamed, the disgraced, the what do you call it? The miserable king. But Tzarechli is Miridas HaNefesh. And for this you need to feel really miserable yourself. To get someone out of misery, you got to feel miserable for him. That's good. That's why we say we make miserable people happy and happy people miserable. So you got to be miserable to feel the pain of the misery. You have to be with the empathy. You give over your desire, your rotzen in davening.
This he said also in
the Lashon Mesiras HaRotzen, I think in the previous chapter was more or less, he said Nas HaRotzen Sekol Ritzeinu Belikus. I don't know if he said Mesiras HaRotzen, like Mesiras Nefesh. I don't know that Lashon, but the Teichem was there. Okay, and same thing through Teira, you bring the Makif into Pnimi. This he also didn't say specifically. Pious. The two edges, the two sides, are positive mitzvahs and negative mitzvahs. Okay, finish chapter 172, page 348 and 349.